When you hear the word leadership, you listening right now, what image comes up for you in your mind? I'll just ask you, Antonia, because you are sitting here right now. The person listening doesn't have a microphone. They're just listening with us, but
I have a microphone.
You do. And what do you think of when I say the word leadership? What comes up as a picture in your mind? The first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, you and I have been talking about leadership a lot, so there might be a bit of a bottleneck of ideas in my head right this moment. But when you asked me this before, I would almost say that not very much came up at all. It was, I don't actually think about leadership that much. I don't consider it. I don't think about it. I don't desire it. It's not something that really is highly relevant to me. So when I think about leadership, I generally go to, well, I'll say this, I go to abstractions of definitions.
Yeah.
Like what could leadership be? What makes up, the concept of leadership?
Yeah.
But I don't really see a specific person. I don't see a specific position. I just think of the abstraction of what it means to lead.
Yeah. I would imagine that you listening right now, if you're like most people, when I say leadership, the image most people have in their mind is the boss. The boss of the company or the person you work for or the person that tells you what to do every day at your work. Sometimes it could be maybe a leader in a community organization, like maybe a church, like church leadership, something like that. But the other image often people have then is like military leadership. And I would say that most people, if it's not an abstraction like you're talking about, Antonia, if it's like the real experience of leadership, like I'm following a leader, almost always I think the image people have is inside of some type of hierarchical structure.
Yeah.
Some type of institution. From my viewpoint, I think it's very positional in people's minds. It's like, oh, that's the leader. That's who we follow. That's who we listen to. That's who gets to call the shots.
Yeah.
And we know that's not, even though that's the image we all bring up, many of us know that's not actually what true leadership is. That's positional leadership. And in fact, if you look at any leadership book or business book, often they'll talk about, you can be a leader without having the position or the title, be a leader without the title, be a leader in your organization, influence people around you without the title or the position. And so I think in the public consciousness, even though we immediately have the image of hierarchy and structure and the boss, quote unquote, I think we have now in our public consciousness this notion that, oh, I can take leadership or take the lead in something even if I don't have the position. I think that is a modern idea that maybe we don't always initially think of, but it does come to us if we sit with that for a moment.
I think you're right. It might be that the reason why nothing really comes to mind is I haven't been in a situation where, like a hierarchical situation, where other people are above me for a while.
Yeah.
Like I haven't really belonged to any sort of institution for a very long time. And, we co-own Personality Hacker, so
we do have employees.
I mean, I guess I'm the leader. And again, I that's not really something that I think about. And so that's probably why it goes blank, because the person who I should be thinking about, I'm just sort of setting that aside. And I know this about myself because there are ways in which I do want to have leadership. I think of it as influence, right? It's become almost trite now, but the first time I heard the phrase thought leader, I was like, yes, if there's any kind of leadership that I would desire, it's the ability to influence how people think about things. But I also know that I'm a little allergic to the idea of the responsibility that comes along with that. And I know that about myself. I know that leadership is not that attractive to me, in part because it makes a person very responsible. And I don't really like being responsible for people outside of myself. So leadership is something I've never really desired or pursued. And yet at the same time, I absolutely have desired and pursued it because, as I said before, I have a microphone.
Yeah.
For some reason, I believe that people should be listening to how I'm thinking about things. And that clearly is me putting myself in some form of leadership.
So let's go down that road, because I think it's going to unlock the ability for us to talk about this from a personality type lens. Yours and my personal experience and how we see this a little differently. I think a lot of people see leadership differently. I think they've got a very different relationship to it. And I bet you it's dependent on their cognitive wiring, their personality type. So when you say that I like the idea of being a thought leader, but the idea of leadership and the responsibility makes me a little nervous. Is it because when you hear the word leadership or you think of leaders, it's driving toward a specific outcome And thought leadership allows you just to influence thoughts without having to be responsible for an outcome. Like, unpack that a little bit more for me.
Yeah. When I mentioned, I think of it kind of conceptually, I think a part of that is the idea of being able to corral people. Herding cats. Well, here we go. Here's some visualizations coming up for me. Maybe I just need to talk about it. But the idea of herding cats, like getting people together and in cooperation with each other to all be pointed towards a specific goal or outcome. And while I do know that there are other brands and forms of leadership other than just making something happen, I do think that if you set yourself in a position of leadership and you succeed and you manage to get people paying attention to you, that's the first thing you have to do is get people to pay attention to you. And then you have to engender, in some form, you have to engender loyalty. Even if that's not loyalty to you as an individual, it's just loyalty to the position that you've taken. And then you have to establish some form of credibility for why other people should be listening to you. It could be the position, but it could be, a transfer of trust from somebody else, or maybe you are highly capable or competent and people see that and read it and assume that that's transferable to whatever it is that you're doing. So you've managed to get yourself in a position, or you've either created it or you stepped into it. And now you have a bunch of people who are like, okay, so what would you like us to go do then? And you don't have anything for them. And this is something that we've kind of struggled with a little bit in this, before we had programs or places where we could help people take what they're learning and apply it to their lives. When you gather attention and energy towards you and you have no place to funnel it, people don't just go, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll go somewhere else. It's like a souring.
Yeah.
And I think the responsibility that I shirk away from is this idea of people handing me that level of responsibility to now be directive. Go do this, go make this happen, go handle this. And it's my responsibility to make sure everybody's doing that. And it's my responsibility to make sure that everybody's in cooperation. And then that thing fundamentally, the outcome that I directed ends up happening. That all sounds real big to me. It's like, do I really want to be doing that? Or do I want to just talk in a microphone and hope it works out? Yeah. And so I know that about myself, though. I don't have any delusions that I should be in positions of leadership as long as I feel that way. I know there is that concept of the reluctant leader.
Yeah.
It's close to the reluctant hero. And there are some people who find themselves in positions of leadership reluctantly. And while the image is nice and it sounds like that's the highest qualified person, the person who just is so good at leading that everybody hands it over to them, but they've never wanted it, I think that's a fantasy. I think most people in positions of leadership are people who want to be there. They have very intentionally gotten themselves there.
Yeah.
Hopefully, fingers crossed, they've done the work to become qualified for that place. And the people who don't really want it don't hone the necessary skills to just be this amazing, awesome, natural leader that everybody just wants to hand their followership over to.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll just do it. Like, I know that that's more fantasy than it is reality.
Yeah.